All right, as always, as recently as always 6 months ago or however long it's been, this podcast is one of many that is brought to you by Audible. What is it? Audible.com. And if you go to audibletrial.com/TNRL, which is short for This Non-Religious Life, put in that URL in your web browser, go to the Audible website, sign up for a free 30-day trial, and you get a free audio download on us. So that's how much we care. You get something for free. They have over 100,000 titles available for download for any mobile device that you happen to use. Kindle, MP3 player, iPod, they do it all. So audibletrial.com/TNRL. Ken, take it away.
Jesus got out here.
I thought I was a good Christian.
Jesus died on a cross. I go to church every Sunday. Jesus got out here. Then I read that this Jesus died on a cross for a rotten hooker.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday. I am a very religious person.
I thought I was a good Christian.
The very line the serpent told to Eve in the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spreads confusion and promotes lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spreads confusion and promotes lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spreads confusion and promotes lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spreads confusion and promotes lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spreads confusion.
Hey everybody, it is Monday, June 4th, 2012. This Non-Religious Life, I'm your host, Ken. All the way back across the country, we have Bob, one more time.
How's it going? I was doing I think next week I'm going to do it as Don Pardo.
And we have Jason.
Hey, how you doing?
And big thing we wanted to get to last week, and I want to kick it off this week. We had a very, very long YouTube comment on one of our previous shows. It wasn't last week's show; it was the week before. And I'll link to it in the show notes so you guys can go back and check out the really long comment. But I want to cover it. I mean, it's 9 boxes of text to break his questions into sections. We always like to go over any feedback, negative or positive, and so I think we should start with it. I know Jason started it. Okay. So,
Luke 99
yeah,
out there.
there.
Think about, you know,
rather than wait until next week. But yeah, so first question was about, we were talking about the Confederate flag and as historical device because we were talking about the Pentateuch and more specifically the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, as a historical artifact placed in schools. So he goes on to say, if you disprove the Confederate flag as a historical artifact, shouldn't you also disprove the Stars and Stripes, at least versions prior to 1968 when the 14th Amendment was ratified? The American flag of, say, 1857 was the flag of a nation that legally protected slavery, defined slaves as a person, excluded slaves from citizenship, and excluded even free blacks from voting juries and public offices in every state except for Massachusetts. In social policy, the Confederacy of 1861 was identical to all of America in 1857. The Southern states claimed nothing for themselves other than what had been in the Constitution from its beginning and sought to retain both what the Founding Fathers had deliberately placed in the Constitution and what the Supreme Court had reaffirmed as late as 1857 in the Scott versus Sanford Dred Scott decision. Shouldn't you be consistent and also object to the Stars and Stripes because of its history?
I think he raises an excellent point, but I think where he's going, and the whole argument was because we were talking about the Ten Commandments displayed in a courthouse, a public courthouse, a U.S.
school,
courthouse, or a school.
Yeah.
And the argument was that the Ten Commandments should stay because of their historical value, and I equated that to the flying of the Confederate flag over the South Carolina State Building. And
yeah, I don't think we ever said it's not an historical artifact. It is. What we did say was that appealing to historicity in order to get your way is disingenuous.
Yeah.
The second part I want to stress is the American flag of those eras isn't immediately recognizable as representing those atrocities.
Well, and I also like to think about it as, if he makes the point that, why is it, on in his question, he makes the point about, like, why is it, he brings up a case in, like, 1941 when all of these things were okay, and now suddenly it's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, slavery was legal, so that doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
Like I like to think that we're moving forward as a culture, and I embrace the things that are forward thinking and moving forward, and I reject the things that are symbols of holding on to the past.
Yeah. An appeal to tradition isn't a reason to maintain terrible habits, and I'm sure he would agree with that in some respects. The major point, I mean, this is obviously the Confederate flag issue is secondary to what we were talking about. It's just sort of an example. You can't just appeal to historicity to justify, getting your way. The Decalogue represents something specific. It's a Judeo-Christian set of laws, and that putting that in public view violates the Establishment Clause, as well as by giving sort of justification to and endorsement of Christianity over other religions. Just like displaying the Confederate battle flag represents what the Confederacy was going for, which, in this case, was the overturning of the congressional order on banning the importation of slaves from Africa because they felt that they could no longer compete with an industrializing North. It's really complicated economics, and I'm not going to get into it. I'm not,
Well, but he makes the point though that the U.S. flag prior to the Dred Scott decision, represents all of those same things, and I'm like, yes, but you know what? We don't have that flag anymore. We got better. We moved forward.
That's true too.
The same government that flew under that flag that endorsed those bad policies changed them and moved forward. That's progress.
Well, that also, you don't see the sort of gripping onto prior forms of the flag, with the exception of in museums or when you see all of the American flags in their progression from the earliest one until the current one. But when I see the 1857 or 1861 flag of the United States, I don't immediately think about, hey, that was a government that endorsed slavery. When I see the Confederate battle flag, I do think, hey, that's the battle flag of a country that tried to secede from our own for the purpose of maintaining slavery. And I think the difference is nuanced, but it's there.
I agree. I mean, and I think he, like I said, I think he raises a very good point. But this is why I don't think that is a sharp point or a relevant point.
Yeah,
It
I
is
think
worthy
he's
of
definitely-
consideration.
It's something we're thinking about for sure, and I'm glad he brought it up. As always, I appreciate feedback.
Yeah, and, I also like these things because then it makes me dig a little deeper too, because the whole argument the whole discussion started with talking about the commandments case in Giles County, Virginia.
Mhm.
That was what
Yeah.
started the whole thing, and I did a little further reading in all the prior court cases for these religious images and religious, I guess, artifacts that are placed in the square. It undergoes the Lemon test, and one of the Lemon test has it was a I don't know. Hold on, I had it up here. It was a decision from the 1971. Lemon versus Kurtzman, Superintendent of Public Obstruction in Pennsylvania, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it was a 71 decision, and after the 71 decision, they applied the Lemon test to these church-state violation things. And one of the aspects of the Lemon test is that the artifact or the image has to be there with religious purpose. And in Giles County, Virginia, it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And once it was found that it fails that test, that's when they started appealing to historicity, and that's my problem with the historicity claim. If they wanted to put, a copy of say it was like, an example of law through the ages, and they wanted to put the Decalogue up alongside, say, the Code of Hammurabi and, say Roman documents or ancient Chinese documents of laws, that is a valid historical presentation. But the claim to historicity is after the fact. It's you're caught with your pants down, so you start grasping at straws to see what you can do to get out of the situation.
Matt brings up the 9/11 cross.
I've actually seen the 9/11 cross, and it's, I believe, currently on the grounds of a church in New York. It's a few blocks from Ground Zero, but I believe it was transported to the grounds of a church, which is well within their right to place it there.
Well, I think if it would be all right even if it was on public property, because that's a symbol of America stepping up their game in the religious war.
Well, let's evaluate it on the Lemon Rule. Does it have a secular legislative purpose?
Possibly. That's a really tough one.
And does it have the primary effect of either advancing or inhibiting religion? I would argue it's advancing religion, but that may not be the primary effect, and we could maybe talk about that. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the third prong is that it must not result in an excessive government entanglement with religion. That's the criteria. And so, if it was there as a monument to to the event and to an historical event and the people who died there, then you could maybe make the argument that it does not have a religious purpose. But I'll tell you, the easy answer is you put it in a church, and then there's end of discussion.
Yeah. And that's where it is right now. It's actually on the grounds of, I believe it's a Catholic church, like 3 or 4 blocks from Ground Zero. Because obviously they had to move it out of there because they're trying to build something in that spot.
Do you think it would have
I
stayed
think
there
the 9/11 cross gets a little hairy because it obviously wasn't constructed. It's a piece of rubble that just happens to resemble a cross. So it has that sort of dual nature.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I agree, and but I think that if if people want to fight that battle, I'd be interested to see where it goes. But then the easy answer is just put it on the church. Put it in a neighboring church.
Matt said it meant something to the responders at 9/11. Maybe, yeah, certainly. I'm hesitant to oppose it just because it is a piece of rubble rather than something that's constructed. I mean, it'd be hard to say, well, you can only be there if you can also find, all the other religious symbols somehow in the rubble and put them all together. And it just gets hairy, and then you just get a mess on a piece of land. Next, the World Trade Center ground isn't public property. It is private. It's owned by someone, and if they wanted to put it up, that's their own prerogative.
Yeah, that's their prerogative as well.
So, I guess that actually just settles it right there. Is that even if it was at Ground Zero, that's not public property. So
yeah, that is a tricky one. But like the in the what if the cross was put in the National History Museum? Well, so Matt says, what if the cross was put in the National History Museum? Well, then it's there as a piece of history and serves no religious purpose.
Yeah. I mean, it is a piece of history. I mean, that's one of the turning points of the last century or so. It definitely defines what the country is today. And how we reflect on foreign policy, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of religious artifacts in history museums, but they are not places of worship. It is not there to advance a religion. A museum serves an entirely secular purpose.
Well, except if the Museum of Creation down in.
Oh yeah, the creation.
Yeah, right.
The Creation Museum. Oh, jeez.
No, I mean there are great pieces of religious artifacts in museums. The Codex Sinaiticus, the Codex Vaticanus, the Codex Washingtonius, which is in the Smithsonian. Great pieces of really ancient religious literature. I'll say very valid in historical meaning, but it's not there to evangelize, which is what the Ten Commandments in that school are meant to do.
Right.
So.
And that was sort of the point to the discussion in that article was that they had it up there with a clear religious purpose, and then they went and tried to. There was this campaign of obfuscation where they tried to bury it behind other historical documents when clearly their original intent was religious purpose.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we can move on to the next. Because he has 5 questions. Some of them are kind of long. This one's short, actually. And we were talking about inspiration, which is something that I know Matt and I have talked about at length.
I still don't
Matt
have
talks
my hand
about
on
things.
What was that, Jason?
I was just shocked that Matt would, talk about things.
Yeah.
Inspiration simply means that God reveals himself through the text of the Bible. No, textual criticism doesn't challenge inspiration at all. How could it? God continually reveals himself through Holy Spirit as a person encounters God through Scripture, which is a vehicle God uses to reveal himself, not the revelation itself. Scripture isn't an end, it's a means. And I definitely know people who would agree with that, but I would be careful if you want to be orthodox. You have to be really careful about how you approach this, because you start approaching sort of a mid-Rosh exegesis, which, strictly speaking, isn't orthodox at all. You're talking about deeper meanings and meanings within the text and things coming out, as we encounter them, which it's kind of a hairy area. Now, what I would say to that is, as textual criticism reveals motive, context, and redaction, the story we obtain from textual criticism makes inspiration moot. You don't need inspiration to come up with the books of the Bible. You don't. We understand why Matthew wrote his gospel, or why Mark wrote his gospel, or why Luke Acts was redacted from Marcion's gospel. We understand these theological motives. We understand, the context of the culture. We know why, Ephesians and Colossians and 2 Thessalonians, something that Matt and I were actually just talking about the other day, is different from, say, the 7 authentic Pauline epistles. We understand why the pastorals are different than the Pauline epistles, why 2 Peter is different than 1 Peter. You see a theological progression, you see motive, you see intent, you see cultural context, and all of that stuff means you don't need inspiration to write it. God didn't need to guide the hand because cultural expectations and theological ideas that were emerging at the time already guided that person's hand.
I think that sort of textual criticism does a really good job of explaining, where, like you said, it explains the motives and the emerging theological ideas that are coming out. But I think that the original authors or the people who are reading it now, they consider it inspired because, or they make that claim that it's inspired because, well, reading it guides their lives somehow or guides their thinking, and that's God revealing himself to them. I'm not sure. I've really been having a hard time with this idea of inspired document because, in the sense of looking at it as a human document with textual criticism, I noticed that if you have several scholars working on the problem, they tend to get the same answer. And when you have a whole bunch of people getting the same answer to those questions, it probably means it's right.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to deal with some differences in his fifth question because he asked a question about my book. But more or less. There are definitely areas for debate, but there are areas that are just like absolutely, not for debate anymore. Say like how the pastoral epistles aren't written by Paul. There are almost no modern critical scholars who doubt that. But then again, there are areas that are a little hairier, like whether or not 2 Thessalonians was written by Paul, or say, whether or not, Jude was written by the same Jude as, is mentioned as being Jesus' brother, or James for that matter.
In terms of textual criticism, you know how those articles get settled? New data.
Oh, yeah, of course. Of
right,
course.
So new data, and then it skews the argument one way or the other. Not there's no inspiration. The articles are settled by new data.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what you see is you don't see a flip-flopping from one side to the other. You usually see a progression of opinions where in the beginning you might have a vast sort of plethora of ideas, but they eventually sort of get siphoned down and narrowed to a point where, you have a whole bunch of arrows pointing at one spot. Say the documentary hypothesis, the Old Testament. You get a whole bunch of arrows pointing to the fact that, it was written in sections, not by one person, and then redacted later on. With synoptic problem theories, you see, Markan priority is almost undisputed now, because it's just all the evidence points to Mark being the primary gospel that Matthew and Luke drew from.
Yeah, so critical thought is going to rely, the consensus opinion or the majority opinion is going to rely on evaluation of the data and acquiring new data and evaluating that and incorporating that into the argument. And isn't orthodox thought just who won the fight? Whether they're right or wrong, it's who won the fight.
Yeah, it is. That's technically what orthodox means. It really means, the sort of right thinking. And orthodoxy was definitely decided by just like history is decided by who wins. The victor writes the book, not the loser. and it's interesting with Christianity because you had an emerging Catholic or universal church, which sort of tried to integrate all these outlying fringes into itself. So you have, Pauline Christianity, and you have Jansenian Christianity, and you have Petrine Christianity, all sort of melded together to create one sort of monolithic church. But
well, Matt makes the comment that I guess this maybe with regards to me saying that orthodoxy is just who won the fight. He says it's more nuanced than that. But I don't know. I'm not a historian, but historically, when there were those fights over orthodoxy, the guy who lost was the guy who was dead.
Well, not always dead, but definitely the guy who was sort of outcast. When you look at, say, the Arian heresy in the 4th century, Arius wasn't killed, but he was certainly marginalized, and that's what you had. And Matt does make the good point. Major and minor traditions always exist side by side. Even after the Council of Nicaea in 325, the Arian heresy continued, and for a long time too. Some could say that Arianism still kind of exists in the forms of, say, Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff like that. So
Jason's over here cracking up. I have no idea. Well, he is like losing his shit. What is he doing?
Just kind of like stop.
What's so funny? I got to know the joke, man. What did you do?
No, I'll tell you after the show.
Oh my god. He's like crying. Okay. Yeah. Matt actually brings up modern day oneness Pentecostals versus Trinitarian Brethren. And that's exactly, to counter the Arian heresy, that's where we get Trinitarianism.
Well, a lot of these fights over orthodoxy now, I will grant you, are much more civilized in the modern world. But how did the Catholics deal with the Protestants 500 years ago?
Yeah, or
they killed them.
Yeah, definitely burned them alive. All you have to do is look at, say, Queen Mary of England, the first ruling monarch after Henry VIII. His daughter, her first daughter, who was Catholic, who is dubbed Bloody Mary because she was ridiculously anti-Protestant. She had a lot of Protestants burned at the stake.
Yeah, and I admit, right, he's right. The ancient world was cruel.
Yep. And state-imposed religion is never helpful to Christianity. Sure, never helpful to anyone, really.
Right. State-imposed religion is never helpful to Christianity. It's never helpful. You're right. Never helpful to anyone, which is why we have an establishment clause. That is exactly why we have an establishment clause.
Yeah. So the next question he asked is, why can't citizens place the Ten Commandments in public buildings? Prior to the 1940s, it was perfectly permissible to do so. Beginning only in the 1940s, did the Supreme Court use a concoction called the Doctrine of Incorporation to manipulate the meaning of the Due Process and Equal Protection Clauses of the 14th Amendment and twisted them into devices by which the court applied the First Amendment to the states, which until then had applied only to the federal government. How can you possibly claim that the Constitution requires states and localities to purge religion from their public venues when no federal court prior to 1940 had ever ruled that it does, and when the founders themselves expressly limited the First Amendment to Congress, not the states? Your idea of an all-encompassing separation of church and state is an invention of the mid-20th imposed on the citizens of this country without their consent. It is a fundamental alteration of the historical meaning and application of the Constitution that was effected not by the democratic constitutional mechanism of amendment and ratification by the states, but by arbitrary judicial fiat. That's the definition of tyranny. Do you support judicial tyranny? Now, this discussion is really, really complicated, and bear in mind I'm not a lawyer, but I do have some grasp on this. Localities and states only have the rights which are not delegated to or outlined by Congress. That's the express intent of the 10th Amendment. States and localities, or the people as it says, can decide on things that aren't given with express power to Congress. The First Amendment is a foundational piece of legislation outlining what can and cannot be done with regards to free speech and expression, making it clear that Congress cannot obstruct these rights. Now, if Congress doesn't have the right to obstruct free expression and speech, the states certainly can't either. States and localities can only pass laws regarding civil liberties which increase the liberties of people, not restrict them. This is actually something that was decided by a federal court in California, I want to say in the 1980s. I think it had something to do with leafleting in a mall or something like that. I forget the exact situation. I tried to find the transcript, but I actually had to do it when I worked for a nonprofit, and we had to decide where we could go to establish free speech zones, which is an awful thing. Now, establishing or endorsing a particular religion within a municipality or state would thus impose religious tyranny on the citizens, who are not congregants of that particular denomination. As for the 1940s, I don't know how historically valid that comment is.
Well, I think that's an appeal to historicity. Like, it was just as illegal in 1940 as it is now, only now we're doing something about it.
Yeah.
Or I should rather say, I don't like to use the term illegal. I should say it was just as unconstitutional.
Yeah, no, exactly. Just because in the 1940s, if this is true, they started moving away from allowing this stuff. There could be any number of reasons why that's possible. It could be a more pluralistic society. It could be, that popular political activism was becoming more popular. It could just be that it's the first time that it really came up in front of the Supreme Court, and people actually thought about it as an issue.
Well, or it could have been. Yeah, I mean, it could be that that those people that would have stood up prior to 1940 were afraid to do so.
No,
it wasn't that long ago you would get hurt or jailed or fined. I mean, it's
mob mentality was really popular in the 1800s and the early 20th century. People didn't want to oppose the status quo. In the 1940s, you begin to see the early rise of sort of, after modernism and postmodernism, where people begin to move away from traditionalism and start to really question what's around them. And I wouldn't say this is judicial fiat or judicial tyranny. This is the judiciary branch doing exactly what it's supposed to do: interpret the letter of the law as drafted by the legislature and passed by the executive. It's exactly what we have a judicial branch to do. This is checks and balances.
Right.
Simple as that. As for the idea that separation of church and state is some sort of mid-20th century conspiracy theory against, Christians, I would suggest reading any of the letters from Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist or to John Adams, like any of them. Particularly his letter to the Danbury Baptist, where he outlines the idea that church and state has to be separate. If you enjoy your religious liberty, then the two cannot touch, because the second they intermingle, you have a mess. And so, they have to maintain those.
It was funny. I was listening to these. I was listening to this one bunch of guys talk. It was after the fact of this one debate where they were debating if Christianity is good for America, and the guy was making the case about how the wall of separation of church and state only go he has that idea that one-way wall and religion needs to be in the Constitution and needs to be in government. And they were talking about how, like, historically, not just Jefferson, but a lot of people, when the country was being formed, wanted to make sure that there wasn't religion in government because they were afraid, like, oh my God, a Catholic could be president. But then he was, they called him like a papist, or worse yet, a Jew, right? They were like so afraid that there would be some religious person in this secular office that that 200 years ago, the religious leaders of the time were making sure that there would be no religion in the Constitution.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And that was what that's why Jefferson's writing that letter to the Danbury Baptists. He wasn't writing that letter to say, like, hey, you guys stay out of religion or out of government. He was writing them to assure them that their religion would be safe from governmental influence.
No, absolutely. That's exactly the point of it. If like I said, if you enjoy your religious liberty, and you should, it's your absolute right. It is an inalienable right. Then you have to embrace the idea of a separation of church and state, because there's no such thing as a Christian nation that's sort of ambiguously Christian. It's always one denomination, and when power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and if you think religion can be corrupt without that power, just imagine it with it.
Matt makes a comment. I think what his comment is about. He's asking if there's some idea of deistic natural law, and I think in that sense, I think governmental leaders at that time and even now can't be helped but have their religious thinking or their theology or their belief in a deistic natural law influence their thinking, but the governmental law has no founding based on a deity.
Yeah, no, I agree. They didn't appeal to a deistic natural law. I think what they were doing was they were setting up a series of laws from the ground up. They didn't have to. I mean, there's some vaguely deistic language in it, but that's just really the way people wrote treatises back then. You look at the Treaty of Paris.
Well, they were deists, though.
Some of them were deists. Some of them were Christians.
And
some of them,
it's okay, but they kept their theology out of the government. Your rights and the laws are based not upon what a deity says should be done, but by what we as men agree should be done.
Yeah, no, agreed. Matt brings up one last thing. It's was it Madison who said that our Constitution is only good for a moral and religious people? I don't know. I'd have to look that up. I'm not as keen on my Madison as I am on my Adams or Jefferson. But
get with it, Ken. Jesus Christ. Come on, dude.
But John Adams had a lot of.
I'm blaspheming.
He had a lot of contempt for religion.
Well,
so
at this break, we should.
Yeah. Well, all right. So we're about the halfway point. There was another sort of like side discussion going on about, we're always talking about the afterlife and those ideas of what happens after you die, heaven, hell, kind of thing, and we thought a good book to recommend for the week, although we didn't really have any relevant news stories to tie it into, would be Mary Roach. She's a great author, and she wrote a book called Spook. And I think more specifically the title is Spook, A Scientific Investigation into the Afterlife. And Mary Roach is a great author. She's not a scientist, but she is a great journalist, and she has written several books. There's Spook, Stiff, about what happens to cadavers. And Stiff is Stiff is a good companion to Spook because this is what happens to your body after you die. And in Spook, she's looking about, well, what happens to your spirit or soul if there is one after you die? And she investigates mediums and afterlife, or what do they call those people that have the near-death experiences? And, basically just ghost stories and haunts. And it's a really great book. And it is available for a free download at audibletrial.com/TNRL. Just one more in a long list of ones that you can download for free if you sign up for the 30-day trial.
Awesome.
If you haven't read Mary Roach, she's a lot of fun. Her books are technical without being overly technical. It's not like you're reading a science textbook. She has a very easygoing style. She's my girlfriend's favorite author.
Yeah, she's written a few books that I've wanted to check out, like Stiff: The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers, and Packing for Mars.
Yeah, Packing for Mars is her newest one.
Yeah. So, and all of those are actually on Audible, so check it out. Okay. So, I think we can jump into the next comment really quick. This was about, I made the passing comment about the Irish, killing the Irish, which was kind of a half joke, but he took it seriously and said, "Your Irish history is defective. Ireland was dominated by England circa 1175. At the time, both were Catholic countries. The Irish/English conflict originates then and is obviously not religious. By the 16th century, a now Protestant England was imposing an essentially colonial policy in Ireland that included settling English and Scot migrants in Ireland, thus displacing the Irish from their lands, and also included a brutal political repression of the native Irish. Remember Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal? Political opposition polarized into Catholic Irish seeking independence and Protestant Irish collaborating with the English. This is a political division, not religious. No religious doctrine or affiliation was in dispute. The Irish were fighting for national liberty and not a religious war. The conflict was and remains political and nationalist. Consult a history of Ireland."
Well, he told you.
Yeah, it was kind of a half joke, and I was using it to point out the division between religious and not. I could have just as easily pointed out, say, India and Pakistan, which used to be the same country, and the only reason they really hate each other is because after the independence from England, they split into two separate countries because of religious tensions between Muslims and Hindus. Really, they're basically the same. They were the same country for years and years and years. The only difference is religion. In fact, it's not even like it was people living in Pakistan, what's now Pakistan, and people living in what's now India. You had a lot of Muslims living in what's now India move to Pakistan, and a lot of Hindus living in what's now Pakistan move to India. Generally, for a long time, they were the same ethnic group. They just adhered to different religions. Now, this is where we get into history. After Henry VIII proclaimed himself the head of the Church of England, he pretty much outlawed Catholicism. And while it's not outlawed today, Catholics in Ireland definitely take offense to the idea of the Queen, not the Pope, being Christ's vicar on earth. So yeah, doctrine very much is in dispute there. You're talking about a very fundamental doctrine for Catholics, that the Pope is infallible, whereas living in a country where the Church of England is the state church makes it out to be that the Queen, in religious circumstances, is infallible.
Well, if you think about that, isn't that sort of the natural extension of divine right of kings? I mean, King Henry VIII, he wasn't king because, or it was believed, his authority as king came from God.
Yeah, no, divine right of kings, absolutely. Which should appeal to the epistles of Romans and Peter. where it says, that no one rules but by God, and all power comes from God. So they use that to justify their own power. What happened in England is a bit more political, where you had Lutheran reformers sneaking into the country and infiltrating the sort of the cabinet of King Henry VIII, and convincing a man who was vehemently Catholic but horribly power hungry that he should be the head of his own church. This is a man who wrote a treatise defending the sacraments and was given the title Defender of the Faith by the Pope, who then eventually, established his own church and proclaimed himself the head of it, and gave himself the title Defender of the Faith after the Pope had retracted it. So he's the head of the country and the head of the church.
I don't know. It just seems like the whole fight just seems sort of like inevitable, in that you have one guy that's the king. Oh, hey, guess what? You're king because God says you're king, and you do God's will because God made you king. And then you have another guy who's the Pope. Oh, well, you speak for God.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing is kind of modeled on the idea of in ancient Israel, you had a king and you had a high priest, and they were different positions held by different people, but it was a sort of a dual thing. So,
I mean, I realize that's a gross oversimplification, but that is in essence where the conflict lay.
Yeah, you can definitely see it boil down to two people striving to have the same authority, and that is the word of God on their side. The other thing, I don't quite understand why he brings up Swift. Maybe he's talking about the native Irish being poor, which is true. But Swift wasn't being serious. His modest proposal is a piece of satire. I mean, it shocking satire, as eating babies is, but it's satire.
Yeah, that's the thing about satire that's so good. People think it's real.
Yeah, satire is best when people think it's legitimately true. The final question here, and I want to get through this really quick because it's really just a plug for my own book. He asks how my book differs from Richard Elliott Friedman's The Bible: A Sources Revealed. I haven't read his book, but from what I know about Friedman, our take on the documentary hypothesis is similar, with the exception that I believe he falls into the camp with Yezekiel Kaufman in dating the priestly source at the time of Hezekiah, while I accept what most scholars agree upon is that it's a post-exilic creation, which is a point based on loaned words and myths from Babylonia, as well as certain later religious assumptions such as centrality of worship. His book is actually his own translation, which is something that I considered but decided against because I didn't want to kill myself on my first book. So I decided to go with the more familiar King James Version, and then left my own translation to references to the Septuagint and the Codex Leningradensis, which I put in footnotes. So that's how it differs, if that at all makes sense.
There you have it.
Yeah. Those are his 5 questions, and thank you, Jim Trueblue 99, for putting that out there. We did cover it,
He raises really good points when he mentioned the point about the old U.S. flags and what they were, what was going on at that time. And it's a valid point. It's a good point. It's worth considering.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great point, and it's something worth thinking about.
Yeah. So, but before we wrap up, I wanted to, I want you to talk about the news article you linked to on Facebook about the Jehovah's Witness family.
Oh yeah.
We're running out of time, but I think we can squeeze this one in.
We are running out of time. I just want to double check something really quick. Why don't you give the overview of this topic?
Well, the headline was a judge orders a family. I forget the exact headline. The judge orders a family of Jehovah's Witnesses to. He orders a blood transfusion for their daughter who has leukemia, and in the opinion of the doctors, the blood transfusion was going to save her life, and her parents were refusing the blood transfusion because of their religious views. I guess in their religious view, blood transfusions are I don't know, what's the word?
They're not allowed. Very frankly, Jehovah's Witnesses believe in a sort of sanctity of
the blood
of life through blood. Blood is representative of life. That's where the essence of life comes from. It's why in
and she
in
was
Kushrut law you can't eat blood. You can't consume blood. It's one of the first laws given to Noah, is that when you eat meat you can't consume blood.
Isn't that kind of
they take that
impossible
to be
do,
very
though?
very literal. You can't have someone else's blood inside you. It's an abomination. To which I say, it's absolutely ridiculous that we live in a society where this is even up for debate. If your child is dying of cancer of the blood and bone marrow, your religious beliefs, as much as you are, free to have them, does not trump the right of your child to survive cancer. This type of cancer is actually incredibly treatable if caught early enough. But if not, it is devastating. You are dead in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, and that's what the doctors said. And apparently the doctors petitioned the court based on a previous ruling in another case, and they got their way. And
yeah.
So I think it was this little girl. I forget how old she was. Not very old. I guess maybe she was
4 years old.
Why can they have it both ways? Why can they be against abortion but pro-death if through rejection of medication?
That's a.
It's not medication in general. It's the blood thing. That's the problem here for them.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that in the article her family said. Like, look, she's in the hospital. She has every treatment available except this one.
Yeah.
Which is the one that would save her life.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't know.
Like, if you're dying of blood and bone cancer or whatever, marrow cancer, and you want to refuse treatment, that is your prerogative. Yeah. But to force this, abstaining from what is the only way to treat this particular disease, which is deadly and very quickly deadly, on a 4-year-old girl is unimaginably horrific. It is absolutely evil.
This one came out of Australia, didn't it?
It did. It did come out of Australia.
Yeah, I think in this instance the courts did the right thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad. But see, this is judicial policy pointing in the same direction, because a few years ago in I think it was Oregon, they ruled the same thing. If parents let their children die because of
that
religious...
Oregon case, those kids died.
Yeah,
they didn't get better; they died.
Nope, they did, and you should be charged with negligence resulting in death.
Yeah, Oregon passed a law that made it a prosecutable offense.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what I'm saying is, like, props to the Australian courts, because I think they made the right decision and they saved a life. I mean, this little girl is going to live to see another day, despite her parents' best efforts to the contrary.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely the right thing.
Yeah, and I saw. I don't know that. I love seeing your comments in the threads on Facebook, because it really brings out some strange people.
Oh yeah, I know.
And so they're like, what happened? Because the first comment you posted where you're like, oh, I see that you have a PhD in quackery, and that was obviously in a response to somebody who deleted their post.
They did. They actually had 2 posts that they deleted, and one of them was. This is a person who I debated with once, who they believe that the ancient Vedic cultures had like atomic weapons. So. Yeah. But it was like, oh, chemo and radiation kills you, and that's horrible. And I was like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a blood transfusion for a little girl who's going to die in a matter of weeks. I'd rather be sick on chemo than dead. Like,
right. Yeah. Well, then like somebody else brought up like, oh no, well, they didn't use blood volumizers because the blood industry is a big conspiracy too, and I was like,
Yeah, I know. It's some of it's ridiculousness. Some of it's just, trying to go off on a tangent. Some of it's conspiracy theory. Some of it's just basic not understanding medical science. Or thinking you understand
like those
medical
videos
science.
that I sent you guys earlier in the week.
Oh, that guy. Yeah, that.
Is that what you laughed about, Jason? Were you reminiscing about what came first, the chicken or the egg?
I was trying to figure out why the planets were round.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that guy. So we're talking about a series of videos. They're like little 2-minute videos. The guy must have done them all like in one afternoon.
I think so.
He's like wearing the same clothes in every instance, and he always starts out. He's like wearing his sunglasses. He's like, "Hey guys, it's me again, and I just have a question. So why, if evolution is true, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because how could you have a species that's developing?"
He said an organism.
I was like,
I know.
If he hasn't evolved to lay the eggs, how did they become about?
Just really that was somebody demonstrating that they have the scientific literacy of a third grader.
I like that what Ken pointed out over that. He's just like, oh my god, and then he comes back and he's like, he's got 49 dislikes and 0 likes.
I almost felt bad for him, like even his uneducated, lackeys that are out there somewhere, the Ken Hamites, couldn't even back him up on that. No likes whatsoever. That sucks.
Not even one.
Not one on any of them.
Yeah.
One of them had like 78 dislikes and like not a single like, man. Like all the comments are just
possible.
negative. I almost felt bad for him. I really did.
Yeah, but I would. It's almost like they were parodies. It was because have you seen the one guy? He's like, I've got a question that'll destroy atheism in 5 seconds. If God's not real, who wrote the Bible?
Holy
yeah,
shit.
Checkmate,
Poe's
atheist.
law, right? It's Poe's law. Isn't it?
I almost thought it was satire. I almost thought, we're talking about satire that's so good. I'm like, maybe this guy's just joking around.
Well, he does have an eBay link to his eBay store on his videos, and his eBay stores. I can't remember, something Bubba. I forget, something Bubba at eBay store. It's really.
What does he sell?
I didn't look. I was like, there's nothing this guy could offer that I would want to buy.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're right about that time.
We are.
We are. It's been a fun hour.
It has been a fun hour. It went by quick.
And no technical issues.
Thanks to everybody hanging out on the chat room.
Yeah,
Matt.
we had
Yeah, definitely. some viewers in there, so that was good. So if you have any questions, comments, hey, we'll cover them. Leave us a voicemail, 757-337-2195. You can send us emails at nonreligious@zombie-popcorn.com. You can like us on Facebook, facebook.com/thisnonreligiouslife. You can put us in your circles on Google+. Listen to us on Stitcher Radio, where I believe they now have a setting where you can rate and whatever, comment on shows, which is great. iTunes, download previous shows and check them out. We're on YouTube. Really, the general hub for this, just go to zombiepopcorn.com. Check out the site, sign up for the newsletter. Jason writes it every week, sends it out, lets you know about this show, all of our other wonderful shows on the network. Any giveaways, such as my book, which is currently going as a giveaway, so you can win a free copy of that. We talked about it here, why it's different from Richard Elliott Friedman's book. And just generally, I think that's everything. Did I miss anything?
I think you did good. That's it.
Good job.
All right, good. There's just so much stuff to go over.
And if you missed any of it, just go to zombiepopcorn.com. It's there.
Awesome. Well, with that, we will see you next week.
Great show.
Bye.
Why can't I touch this button?
This guy out here,
I thought I was a good Christian.
Jesus died on a cross. I go to church every Sunday. This guy out here. Then I read that says Jesus died on a cross for a rotten hooker.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday. I'm a very religious person.
I thought I was a good Christian.
The very lies the serpent told to Eve in the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion.